And we're rolling. Oh my gosh. New mic, new me. Guys, I am so excited because I get to play with my new microphone that I got on Amazon. It's called The Fing, the F-I-N-G, T-H-E-F-I-N-G. I'd like to interpret it as thiefing because, this is just an SM58 clone. So I like to interpret the brand name as thiefing. But anyways, welcome guys, welcome. Today, I want to talk about the Boss GT1000CORE on today's series that I'm dubbing the Gear Spotlight. Very original concept on YouTube, I know. So yeah, I just want to spotlight the GT1000, point out its pros and cons and like stuff I like about it, stuff I don't like about it, why I bought it, just in general, like stuff about the Boss GT1000CORE today. This is my first real multi-effects unit. And by real, I mean like costs more than $200. And I guess the price doesn't determine like what constitutes a real FX unit versus a fake one. There doesn't really exist fake multi-effects units, but what I would consider real, it's hardware. I would constitute it like this: consumer grade FX units versus like professional or semi-professional FX units. Like if you have to like download an entire program, download 3 manuals in order to use a product, I would say that's pro grade. If you just kind of plug and play and just like read the first page of a manual and like that's the entire like tutorial section for the effects unit, I would say that's consumer grade. Obviously you could use consumer grade for like professional gigs. We'll get into that in a second, but I would say this is my first real like pro FX unit. And like a lot of people wouldn't even consider the Boss GT1000CORE Pro because everybody's using HX Stomp, Neural DSP, Quad Cortex. Everybody's using the Fractal FM3 or FM9. Everybody's using, what else is everybody using? That's like the only thing you see on like YouTube basically. I think it's literally just those 3, the FM3, the HX Stomp, the Neural DSP, Quad Cortex. Like it's only those 3 things you see on fucking YouTube. Every professional, every semi-pro has either one of those 3 units. You don't see people with the head rush often because I think like the way the company marketed it on YouTube, it was just like the fad. And like that's a really bad thing to say about a guitar company, just like to say that it's a fad unit. But like the way that the marketing was going down for like the head rush Prime, I think it was called, it was really bad. It was like flash flooding of guitar gear when that came out. It was pretty bad. But anyways, yeah, Boss GT1000 is my first official delve into multi-effects units. Obviously live, before I had this, I was using an HX Stomp that my band leader had, and it was working. He made the patches for me because I just didn't have access to like the unit full time. Only when we rehearsed, only when we did live gigs, and only like when I went to his house to make patches. And the thing is, I only had one patch because I only went to his house once to make the one patch. So when he wanted to try out something new for me, he made the patch in his house, gave it to me, and asked if I liked it, and it was like, yeah, it's all right. And then made changes here and there. I basically only have 2 patches on the HX Stomp. Obviously I could probably still use the I could use the HX Stomp still, but now that I have this, I'll just use this because it's mine and I have more access to it and I can just bring it out. Only thing I don't have is a wireless unit, and again, I still want to make a dedicated YouTube video on that, so stay tuned. I don't know when I'm gonna get it. Probably, I said I was gonna get it this paycheck. I might want to get it next paycheck. It's because like it's a little bit more of an investment because it's like over $50. It's like $100, and a lot of people say $100 isn't shit at all for a wireless unit. I'm aware. That's why I want to be careful. So the question that somebody might have is, why get this specifically over the HX Stomp? Because like that's the next best competitor in its price range, especially used. It's just like, why not get the HX Stomp or the Nano Cortex now that you could get the Nano Cortex now, but why this over those 2 units or over any other unit that you could get? And the only answer, well, not the only answer, but the best answer and the answer that matters to me the most is ecosystem. That is the answer that I could give you 100%. I am so in love with the Boss ecosystem. I only want to use like Boss products when it comes to like multi-effects, amp simming, cab loading and shit. Like I only want to use Boss products. As you can see from the background, Boss Katana, like I said in my last 2 videos, just basically this is my dedicated practice amp, but if I fucking have to, it's 100 watts of pure fucking demon screaming, right? I'm really comfortable with the Boss ecosystem. Even not this product, but like a bunch of Boss products like the SD1 that I'm gonna replace, but I still like use because it's still really good for now. The Boss DD500, I think the delay, the reverb, any effects that you could think of, the chorus, the CE1 or whatever, all of that stuff is just really good stuff. It's really good units. Boss knows how to make a thing or two. The Roland company, like in general, is just like really good shit for the price. So the ecosystem is like really good. I have my amp and the Boss GT1000 registered on their website for no reason other than just because like you can, and they recommend you do it, so I did it. So yeah, it's there. Yeah, I would say that the Boss GT1000 and basically Boss products in general are just like play the guitar, just play the instrument. Like, don't worry too much about signal chain, about tone, about like, you know, all of this that matters to an extent. In the grand scheme of things, just play the guitar. You know what I mean? That's the Boss slogan. Just play the guitar. Unofficial. I couldn't say that Boss as a company is like the Honda Civic. I should say the GT1000 specifically is like the Honda Civics of multi-effects unit. Number one, because if we're going with that title, it would have to go to Line 6, the HX Stomp, or like the HX series in general. That shit has been developed since the 90s, starting with the fucking pod. If anybody's getting the Civic line, it's the Line 6, 100%. I would call Boss the Mazda amp manufacturers, just like effects manufacturers, period, like guitar accessory manufacturers. I would call them the Mazda of that industry, because when you go outside and you see a Mazda CX-5 SUV or a CX-3, you think to yourself like, oh right, that car brand exists. When you see like an old Mazda 3 or a Mazda 5 from like 2010, you go in your head like, oh right, they're also Japanese car manufacturers, right, Mazda. You see Honda, you're like, yeah, that's like the top one for reliability. You see Toyota, the same thing. You see Ford, you see like domestics, you see GM products, and you think like, damn, that's ass. Anyways, you know, Mazda just kind of exists. Boss just kind of exists. You go see a band live, somebody's rocking a Boss katana, and then you kind of think to yourself, oh right, these just kind of exist. Or you think to yourself, oh right, I own that amp, right, with like no other thought after that. It's just like, right, these exist. And that's kind of a shame if you think about it, because these things are so underrated. Obviously that's like a popular talking point on YouTube. Of course these things are overrated, like underrated. Nobody plays them. You don't see like a professional go on stage with the Boss katana. Like, no, you don't see that. They have the katana artists that cost like $500-$700. Nobody plays it. You have the Next Tone, which they don't. I think if they made the Next Tone a dedicated head unit, I think I would probably see more of that. But anyways, yeah, the katana artist is like 40% more than this brand new, and you don't see it. Nobody plays it, which is kind of a shame, because Boss is definitely like not consumer grade, but they're definitely like Boss is definitely like starter professional, just breaking in and like doing your first 5 gigs type with the Boss katana. That's who that's for like starting professional players. I don't necessarily want to change that. I own the Marshall. It'll be somebody else that's more content with the tones of this. I am definitely, but I wanted the Marshall because the Marshall looks cool, and I think that's what that is. I think that's what it is. But anyways, let me not get off track. I would say, yeah, Boss is definitely the Mazda of the industry, because everybody sees it and goes, right, they exist. But when you see a Super Overdrive, or when you see a Boss DD, the digital delay, when you see the CE3, when you see those like little units, you think, oh the Mazda Miata, that thing is fucking popular. That thing is popular for X reason, for Y reason, for Z reason. The pedals are popular because fucking really famous people use them, and they sound really good. Mazda Miata is famous because it's like consumer grade sports car level cheap in the 90s. Best modding platform that you could have got for the price. You could put a fucking LS engine in that goddamn. Anyways, let me not talk about cars. And you know, I am a car guy, but not like that much. I'm not super into cars, like obsessed with cars. I like cars a lot though. But yeah, you see a Boss product on the floor, you think to yourself, oh yeah, that's like what my favorite artists use. Kurt Cobain using the distortion pedal fucking every player that in rock music rocking the fucking super overdrive, $60, and you could sound like the lead guitarist to rap immediately. Warren D. Martini, I didn't forget his name. Kind of did, I'm sorry. Let me just talk about the pros first, and then I'll get to the cons. At least pros for me and then cons for me. So number one, it is a small version of the GT1000. Another pro is that it has 2 effects loops, which is huge for me and is huge for a lot of players, because I think the company assumes that you own more than the pedal that you got, and you're probably going to run more effects outside of it. Like for example, and it's part of a con, but if you have, you know, another modulation pedal like what I do, you know, you just run it into the FX loop of the GT1000CORE, and then either go 4 cable method or take the pedal out, take those 2 pedals out as a standalone unit, and then just play live. And then we'll get into that because it's technically part of the cons. It sounds weird, I know, but you stay with me. And yeah, it just has a good amount of IO, 2 ins, 2 outs, and 2 effects loops. 8 holes is a lot to a lot of people. Probably some men would pay for 8 holes. Anyways, unfortunately, even after spending, like I mentioned in my first video that I uploaded, spending the amount of time and money trying to get this unit, unfortunately, I do have cons with it. This isn't a big one for me. I don't care that much, but it's in conjunction with another con that I kind of care to mention it, but it's scene switching. The Boss GT1000CORE has no scene switching. That is a massive killer for a lot of players. It is. The only workaround to that is just copy and pasting patches before or after in order to do pseudo scene switching, which is basically switching a whole patch. It's patch switching, which every modeler can do. Yeah, that's a real killer, because instead of staying within the patch and just changing parameters with the foot switch, you're stuck copying and pasting patches and having to scroll. And if you accidentally go back, you know, too far, step on the button twice, you're going into like a completely different patch that you didn't prepare for. Or like, oops, I stepped on the wrong foot switch and now I'm on like patch 399 where every single effect is on, and it's just the noisiest, loudest thing for like the first 2 seconds, and then you have to, and you manage to like scramble back to the patch that you intended to go to, and it's just a mess. It's just a mess. I guess another con is that you couldn't like not wipe, but like lock out the presets that you don't want to use, so you don't accidentally like blow everybody's head off with like the one patch and like spot 300 that's just like every effect on. Like you couldn't just like disable that so you don't accidentally go to it live, which is another con that I didn't have on my script. But like now that I think about it, imagine just oops and then everybody's deaf and you're paying for the hospital bill for like the 2 children in the crowd. So like no, that's like a big one that I totally just thought about right now. That's kind of crazy. Number 2, 1 reverb. Like I mentioned in my first 2 videos, 1 reverb and no scene switching, that's kind of hurting a little bit. That is hurting. Obviously, I think what Boss Roland were thinking is that like, all right, we definitely want to make sure that we want to utilize as much DSP as possible so that the player can think that every single block can be, well, not think, so that every single block can be activated and like complete 0 latency, completely smooth operation, like nothing's wrong with it. Use that for 2 hours straight, nothing happens. That was the idea. 1 reverb and no scene switching means that you have to commit the entire patch to 1 reverb sound. For me, I at least wanted like 2, just 2. I'm not one of those players that has to like have 7 different reverbs for the first 30 seconds of the song, the first 2 choruses, and then the 3rd chorus, which is a pseudo chorus that needed a different reverb and delay, and then for the ending a completely different reverb after that. No, I just wanted 2. I was doing a lot of research on this unit. I thought you could have at least 1 more reverb that you could switch on and off, but yeah, that's a little spicy. But yeah, like I said, I think Boss just assumed that, you know what, just put a reverb in one of the effects loops and then you'll be fine. Yeah, that's a viable option. That's what I'm doing now with the modulation block. Why the do they have 4 different delays? Why the do they have 4 different delays? Genuinely, I don't know. I guess delay is cheaper on the DSP, but still, weird choice. So this is a con that literally does not apply to me, but I guess I should mention it. A lot of people say that the signal out of the unit messes with the tone considerably. The thing is, a guitar cable does that. Like, A guitar cable can do that. A pedal that's not on in the signal chain can do that. Even true bypass, it would mess with the signal because the cable still has to like connect with the TRS rings, and like the little tab within the pedal has to connect to the TRS ring. That adds a little bit of impedance, and like over time in the chain, if there's enough pedals, I will mess with the sound. The input of the audio source also has impedance. Like it's I don't know, that's a nothing burger to me. We have 4 different fucking EQ blocks and a master and a global EQ on top of that. That's just a nothing burger. I just wanted to say that because a lot of people have that complaint about the Boss GT1000CORE. 5 different ways to fucking EQ the thing, and people complain that it messes with your tone. What? I have 4 patches right now. I have one for going in front of the amp and into a cab, one going into a power amp and going into a cab, one going into front of house, and then one for DAW, which is basically the last 2 are kind of interchangeable. It kind of doesn't matter, but I guess I have different trim settings for the one going into the DAW because I do reamp and stuff. And I also reamp with the first patch, but that's different because like the specific trim on the first patch is for amp inputs and stuff. But regardless, I guess I'll explain a little bit more about my patches. They're a little bit self-explanatory, but patch 1 is basically this and the amp and 4 cable method. There's settings to adjust the trim on the output of the Boss GT1000 so it not changes the impedance of the output, because I don't think it could do that digitally. I think it's just some type of EQ or specific code, or no, I think it's just EQ. It's not code. I don't think it's that complicated. I think it's just a specific EQ immediately right before the output or the converter straight into the amp, right? So there's a setting where you could pick the trim, and I just have it on the 412 stack. That's what it's called. That's basically my first patch. All my patches have delay and reverb on the foot switch, and then goes into the effects loop of whatever input source. For the first patch, it goes into the FX return of the Marshall. And weirdly enough, I don't have anything coming back into the unit because, like I said in my first video, something just disables in either the Marshall or the Boss GT1000. Because if you have something going to the return, it treats it like you wanted to do a power amp in. It wants to do what my second patch does, but in the first patch. It's weird. So I only have one cable going out into the return of the amp, and that's serving as the reverb, delay, and modulation coming from my chorus, the EHX Neo clone. And also about that, one con, if you're not careful and if you're not like aware and like present in the moment, you have to have a dummy switch, right? What happens if you don't have anything plugged into one of the outs? It just sums to mono. I don't think any other unit does that except this one. Yeah, the Boss GT1000 is weird. Obviously you could run the Boss GT1000 as a stereo unit, but something weird happens when you just try to run like one output. For example, for me, what I do is I use one output, the left output, as my monitors, and I use the right output as my main output because I only do either at most dual mono or just straight up going into one input source. A lot of people would hear that and think like, oh, you're not even using the Boss GT1000 to its full capability. I'm aware. I'm not trying to do anything super crazy. I'm like a dual mono player, like exclusively. So that works out for me. But I think the people at Boss think that guitar players are really stupid, and they kind of are. I don't blame them, but still. Why sum it to mono? That's the one thing that confuses me. Why sum the signal to mono if you have the capability of doing stereo and running into 2 amps that might require 2 different settings on the 2 different splits? It's a little bit of a weird decision considering that stereo players have different settings on the different split. It's weird. I don't know. Editing Vic here. I just wanted to clarify something about the outputs. So obviously it works as intended if there's a guitar player that forgets to put one of the 2 outputs for his stereo rig. But there's players that do that intentionally and it sums to mono anyways, and I don't think it's disableable, if that's even a word. What I'm talking about specifically is about players that specifically use one output off of the main out. So they have wedges on stage, so they don't need to run an output to front of house or whatever. If the patch runs straight mono, then it's gonna sound bad. Obviously you could probably make another patch in order to compensate, but shouldn't have to if you don't want to, you know what I mean? But I'm just clarifying. That's what I meant. And it's just even worse for my case because I literally use one output for monitoring. Trying to use one cable to go to an amplifier and you forget that, you know, your unit sums to mono, you're hearing like a fucking mess out of the amplifier. And obviously the correction is really simple. Just take a TRS adapter for like a 3.5 millimeter to 1/4 inch adapter. Just put it into the second output and like you're fine. But still, it's such a weird decision. One thing that also is really confusing is that the front knobs are exclusively for global control. That's really weird. Only because it should be patch specific. I don't think it would take that much more DSP or that much more programming to make those front panel controls patch specific. There's settings for either the foot switches to do something globally or something patch specific. I don't know why the knobs aren't like that either. The knobs are only global specific controls. That's really fucking weird. Like I run dual mono, right? And I use one split for monitors. I want to use one knob for controlling the volume into my monitors just in case like I'm running into front of house and front of house is controlling what they send to me. And you know, if they blast my fucking ears off because I'm playing a little bit too loud and they want to be spiteful, I want to account for that. But either I do that for every single patch in the fucking system or I just compromise and just like use it for something else and then just put it in the patch preemptively or like put it in the patch beforehand and like plan everything out as like a just in case system. Obviously the just in case argument is valid. You could definitely like plan your patches around some situations, but I feel like the planning is better if you kind of on the fly it with whatever controls on the front. It'd be even worse with more ambient players or like players that have more effects. For example, if one patch had chorus and you needed to control the rate for whatever reason between songs, you'd either have to make a completely different patch or like keep it so that control is specifically global. It's really weird, interesting choice that Boss have made. If you needed to switch between 3 patches and 3 patches had 15 different controls, you're just like that's it, you're cooked. So that's another weird choice. All in all, I still would say that my purchase was like decent. I still made a good purchase. I still wanted this unit. I would say this unit is more dedicated to players that are like me that only have like less than 5 patches and like 2 settings per patch that you probably want to control at all times. For players that have like that need 15 patches per song, a different reverb for every 30 seconds that the song is going on, I don't think this unit is great. It's weird that you have a lot of freedom but limited control. It's like golden handcuffs of effects units. It's like you can do a lot of shit, kind of. You know, is that so? That's why I would say that the Boss GT1000 is more for like set and forget players like me. Sorry for the noise. Sorry for the ambiance, but I forgot to mention something about the Boss GT1000. So in order to access the tuner for the Boss GT1000, you have to press 2 foot switches instead of hold the button. That's the one thing I actually really like about the HX Stomp, like the hold for tuner function. And there's like the Boss GT1000CORE is super duper capable of having a hold foot switch period. So imagine the flexibility of just like doing shit. I think the Boss GT1000, the full size version, can do it. I haven't looked at the manual, but I know you can't do it with the GT1000CORE. And like if I could, I would have had the hold for tuner function already. But I still enjoy my purchase. It still sounds really good. It's still cheaper used than the HX Stomp, not by much, but still cheaper. The company's still really good. I heard that their customer service is really decent. Ever have a problem with it or something, like if I needed to download an update, they always have updates. They released more amps now. They don't have a lot of other brands amps sims in it, but I want to make a series dedicated to like finding tones on the internet and just making it in the Boss GT1000. I think a lot of players, like especially like in the capture era of guitar players right now, they think like I want to capture and have to use the IR of that specific player and then, you know, get an amp capture that from this guy. You could probably do it with like store brand name amp sims like the Boss GT1000 has, like the diamond shit. You can definitely get some U2 tones, like really good. And plus it loads IRs. You can get even closer than you think. That is the spot highlight. I think the next one that I want to do, should I do one for the Marshall? I kind of don't have to. It's a pretty simple amplifier. There's not much going on here. So I'm just, see if there's anything else. See if there's any more video ideas that I could come up with. Just upload more stuff. So yeah, thank you. See you in the next one.